Good evening. I'm Annie,
And I'm Emma. Welcome to Buddy at Night.
where we take a behind-the-scenes look at how Buddy was made. The shoes were probably the most labor-intensive piece of Buddy. They are made out of latex and foam with an inserted inner shoe for the wearer. Because shoes endure so much hard use, they had to be incredibly strong and comfortable to walk in.
The first step of the shoes was to establish the right size. A simple 3D model was created in Fusion 360, and then sliced with a special program that turns 3D models into a collection of 2D cross-sections. This created a base that the shoes could be sculpted onto. Then, using a water-based air-drying clay, the smooth surface and details were applied. Buddy's shoes are based on a vintage wingtip Oxford, so it was important to get the ridges and details right to capture pieces of leather that make the shoe.
Once the sculpts were complete, they had to be cast in plaster. The plaster and water had to be weighed out before being mixed together, which took much longer than we anticipated because our scale only weighed up to 199 grams at a time. We applied a splash coat, or a painted-on coat of plaster, to the shoe sculpts, being very careful to get every hole filled, and then put a wooden housing around it to begin pouring the rest of the plaster in. Then, we had to let the plaster cure and cool off for a few hours. Then was the really tricky part, getting the sculpt out of the plaster. The cardboard was slowly ripped out, followed by the larger chunks of clay. Some of the clay stuck to the surface of the plaster, however, and had to be gently washed off to preserve the pegs cast from the holes in the sculpt. The clay was scrubbed off with brushes, rinsed, scrubbed again until the last traces of clay were washed off.
With our mold created, it was time to cast the shoes in latex. The first layer is the most crucial, as it is the layer that captures all the details in the sculpt. To ensure we did not miss a thing, we filled the entire cavity with latex and left it to dry for half an hour. The latex does not dry completely, but a skin forms on the walls of the sculpt that remained when we poured the latex back out. We repeated this process to establish a solid top layer before moving on to the inner layers. For the inner layers, we applied ace bandages drenched in latex in a papier-mâché type process, adding strength and stability to the layers of latex. In the end, the latex walls of the shoes were about half an inch thick.
After that, we had to create soles for the shoes. We cut shoe shapes in a dense, half-inch thick EVA foam. This was what gave the shoe structure and held it in its shape. The latex wants to warp if it is not controlled. These pieces of foam were adhered with barge, a type of contact cement, into the shoe with the latex wrapping around it. Then a final layer of shoe sole was cut to cover the foam and the latex on the bottom edge. This was barged on to create a realistic-looking sole.
Once the soles were completed, it was time to do the surface finishes. First, using a pigmented latex, the base colors of the sections were painted on. Then, many hours were spent getting the edges and transitions really clean, and individually painting each hole detail. The laces were the final touch. We drilled holes marked by the pegs in the sculpt, and then threaded rope through them, securing them with knots on the other side. The rope was painted brown to match the shoes, and repurposed grommets served as the eyelet details around the ropes.
Now those shoes are made for walking.